Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about more free agency, more moves that have started to fall with some of these teams in the NFL. The first player that was officially franchise tagged this offseason, and some restructuring going on around a majority of these teams, but most of all, this one team in particular. Starting it all off, like I mentioned, with the Miami Dolphins. Some pretty big moves made by them. The first move, I think, was made by them officially. The first player to be released. First of all, they're $56.7 million in a cap deficit, so they're gonna be one of the more frequent teams to restructure, cut players that might surprise a lot of people, but they have to, of course, get under that salary cap number. The first player that they released was their starting linebacker, Emmanuel Ogbah. Now, if you remember, Emmanuel Ogbah was actually signed to a pretty hefty deal for a player like him, a linebacker, outside linebacker, pass rusher, whatever you want to call it. Signed in 2020, 2021. He signed a 4-year deal, $65 million in that deal itself. He had a very impressive campaign, like I mentioned, in 2020, 2021. Then after that, it kind of started becoming a little bit rougher for Emmanuel Ogbah. He wasn't as dominant, or you wouldn't see him have the kind of performances that he had before he had that contract. And regardless of what you want to say, did he deserve it? Was it just him playing better to get that contract and then, kind of dying off after that? He did struggle with some injuries as well and never really got back to that same explosiveness, same kind of player that he was before the deal. But, that sort of contract, for the limited amount of production that you're getting from Ogbah, it didn't make sense for the Dolphins to keep him around, especially with the elevation and just bursting onto the scene from their outside linebackers. Now they got Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips as well. Now both of them are coming off a very, very tough injuries this past season. Like I mentioned, Phillips, he ruptured his Achilles, and I'm pretty sure Bradley Chubb either tore his ACL or had an Achilles, one of those really severe injuries as well. So those two guys are very important for their teams. Pass rushers like that don't just come around, but coming off those injuries are really tough for any pass rusher to come back from. And it's going to be interesting how they recover from that, because it did happen towards the end of the year, so that window of recovering isn't as long as if it happened at the start. But regardless, I think the Dolphins just felt that regardless of the injury, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are still relatively young compared to Emmanuel Ogbah. So just taking that all into account and, seeing the number and the kind of contract Ogbah was getting, it made sense to cut him. They actually saved $13.7 million on the cap. $4 million of that is dead money. But by releasing him, they at least save that and get that deficit to fall a little bit more. Staying on the Dolphins, Xavien Howard, probably one of the biggest players released so far this offseason. One of their two best corners in not only the league in terms of duo-wise, but on the team itself. They just signed Jalen Ramsey. They had Xavien Howard on the team already, but he, again, was one of these cap casualties that kind of had to go, in a sense, because of the huge amount of money he was getting paid. And he led the league in interceptions that one year, that crazy year that he had, where he had just tons of interceptions. But after that season, it wasn't that he couldn't live up to that again, but that season was so far beyond just what regular production looks like you expect from a corner. It was outstanding what he did. I think he was definitely in conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. But to replicate that and produce close to that, he never really got back up to that. Not even that close as well, because he was dealing with injuries, and it just never seemed to fall back all into place for Xavien Howard. They kind of got Jalen Ramsey to kind of, cover for that a little bit. It's great when both of them play. They have a great duo when both of them play, but if you only have Xavien Howard, the corners that they have at that position aren't particularly great. So you kind of see why they got Jalen Ramsey, bringing him in. You kind of always almost have at least one corner that's an all-world corner, a top 10 corner that you can stick in there and be comfortable that he's going to do his best and limit the opposing team's wide receiver one. And now, with that assurance that you have in Ramsey, this move was almost a no-brainer. It saves the Miami Dolphins almost $19 million in cap space by designating him to be a post-June 1st release. All that means is that his salary cap number, the number that the Dolphins have to carry, is only valid until June, and then after June it'll be officially off their books, off their salary cap. They could technically, and most likely will, release him and cut him from the team in March or April, but it'll still carry over that cap number through June, or at least until after June 1st, and then it'll be officially off. If they did it now and took that number off of the books now, they were only going to save almost barely $3 million if they did it before June 1st. So really no decision to be made there. There's only one thing you could do there. Howard gets off the books, and now Miami can get out of that deficit a little bit and focus on those other starters like I mentioned. Alex Van Ginkel, Robert Hunt, Isaiah Wynn, all these other guys that, could be valued a little bit more. Plus, if you look even further than that, into next offseason, will you pay Tua? Depending on the season that he has, all that extra money you could save up will make the decision later on for a quarterback decision like that a little bit easier if you kind of know where all your numbers are at. So those are the two biggest ones, in my opinion, for the Dolphins and that have happened so far. The next biggest move that kind of rivals that was Tee Higgins. Over the weekend, it was reported that the Bengals let him know that he was going to get franchise tagged. It wasn't really made official until just today. They officially, I guess, documented it as Tee Higgins going to be franchise tagged. That doesn't mean he can't get a long-term deal, but he only has until mid-July to get a long-term deal done. And then after that, it'll only be that one-year deal that he can play on. Similar to last year with Saquon and Josh Jacobs. It's a one-year deal, but they could also renegotiate that and get it to a different number. It doesn't have to be the 21, almost 22 million per year that it's expected to be on that non-exclusive tag amount of money. So, right now he is documented to get franchise tagged. They're definitely in the process of getting that thing done. The Bengals have said it numerous times that they would love to get a long-term deal done with Tee Higgins just to keep him and Jamar Chase together, obviously, because their other wide receiver, Tyler Boyd, is most likely going to be lost in free agency. He's the other one that, a lot of people tend to forget about, not really talk about, compared to Tee Higgins, because Tee Higgins is younger, bigger, perceived to be, the better receiver. I believe he is, but, that's up to anybody's opinion. And Tyler Boyd, he was still a good, reliable wide receiver, in my opinion. He's most likely going to end up on another team that I think would really benefit from his services still, because he's almost like a tight end, a slot receiver that you could rely upon a lot. I think he could be any quarterback's best friend, like I mentioned, like a tight end most often is. And obviously he is more agile, more fluid than a tight end, so it's going to be tougher for anybody to cover him in the middle of the field, and I think he's going to be a good signing elsewhere. I just don't see him staying with the Bengals if they're trying to work out a long-term deal with Tee Higgins as well. And if they don't work out a long-term deal, then this process kind of shifts for the Bengals, because you would expect them to kind of go all in this year now with everything they got, really invest in whatever they need other than the wide receiver position, to go out and make sure that this year they're at least playing in the Super Bowl again. And then if they win it, that's great. The plan works completely as it should have. But if they know that they can't get a long-term deal done, and this is only going to be a 1 year sort of rental for Tee Higgins before he asks for the kind of money that they just can't pay, they have to make sure that this year it's the best that they've ever produced. And, they got to the Super Bowl. They lost to the Rams. But if they could get back there again and then win it, I would see it as a win for them. And I'm sure they would see it as a win if they were able to get a Super Bowl out of this talented group of receivers that they have. And then going forward, once you pay Jamar, obviously still have Joe Burrow, you could still, build a roster after that. But this is as good as it's going to get right now with Tee Higgins, with Jamar, with Joe. This could be the last season with those three, and you have to make sure you maximize that to the best of your ability if and only if you can work out that long-term deal like I mentioned. Elsewhere in the league, there are just other flurries of moves being made. The Rams re-signed wide receiver Demarcus Robinson, just a 1 year deal, $5 million for Robinson there. Had good production for the Rams in that wide receiver room that was very talented from the top with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua obviously jumping onto the scene. Demarcus Robinson in combination with Tutu Atwell kind of provided that support that those two elite wide receivers in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua kind of garnished everybody else to, still shine in some way, but they're going to get the majority of the receptions. So Demarcus Robinson stays in Los Angeles. Elsewhere, the Steelers released their starting center, Mason Cole. He was on a 3-year deal. He had started 34 games overall for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This move overall just clears about $5 million in cap space and gives them a little bit more flexibility, like I mentioned before, with the salary cap number for the entire league going up so much. Now that they're able to cut Mason Cole, they're able to have about $8 million or $7.5 million in available cap space to work with, and that's a big difference than it would have been before, where they actually would have been in a deficit. So this just helps them, get that relief a little bit, that they're at least in the positive now. Don't have to make any crazy moves, and other than that, they don't have any other major free agents to really worry about. Most of their playmakers and impactful players are going to be back under contract anyway, so that sort of move just kind of had to happen if and only if they were able to go out and maybe target a corner opposite of Joey Porter or a linebacker that are out there like a Levante David, Devin White, those kind of guys. If they felt they needed one, potentially sign a replacement center. I talked about on the YouTube Shorts the other day. Brian Allen's out there from the Los Angeles Rams. Connor Williams as well. They could do that, or they could just save it and use it in any other way that they feel right. But he was released just last week or a few days ago. That was one move, and the final move that I thought was pretty significant was from the Saints restructuring Derek Carr's current contract, to help that salary cap number, because the Saints recently, at least recently, have been known to work themselves out of these huge salary cap deficits that they find themselves in. This year they're almost $80 million into the cap deficit, which is crazy just to think about with all these contracts that they have. So they had to restructure Derek Carr's deal, and it's expected to save them about $23 million by converting some of that guaranteed money on some of his contract years to a signing bonus, and kind of working out of it that way instead of still giving him his money but just classifying it as something else, I guess, in a way. That's not all the work they're going to be doing. They're also expected to rework deals from some of their offensive linemen. Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz were the names mentioned in a lot of the reports that I read leading up to this episode. So I expect the Saints to be very active within their own roster to restructure some deals and get something going. They still have a good amount of time. They have almost 2 weeks left, a little bit over that, to restructure these deals and get under that salary cap number. But like I mentioned, this has almost become sort of a trend with the Saints. The deals that they give out, restructuring them, getting under that salary cap number, it might hinder them from signing, some big name free agent to a lot of money, but they're still always able to remain competitive. They are getting up there in age with their roster, which could become a problem, but for now, they always seem to just get by and bring that number down and still be competitive in an NFC South division that, isn't the toughest, so they can get by, but with some moves that have been made, that could change, and then the Saints could be in trouble, but that's another conversation for another day. Like I said, they're able to restructure their quarterback's deal and get him down. And that was that for that segment. But on the topic of quarterbacks, another quarterback that has been in the news recently was Sam Howell. A lot is being made of what's going to happen to him if the Commanders, like they've been mocked, draft Jaden Daniels, or Drake May. What's going to happen with Sam Howell? A lot of reports say that he does have some other teams interested in him. He didn't play that bad, in my opinion, this past season, and I think he could be of service somewhere else, I guess. I would say. Heck, he could even be a pretty good starter on another team, but more on that and more around the teams that are interested, what it could mean for the Commanders, some scenarios that the Commanders could consider. All that coming up on the other half of the show and on the other side of this break. So don't go anywhere. More quarterback talk around the Washington Commanders right up next.